If you take somebody whose audience is children and you try to sell them beer, we are going to have an issue. All right, welcome back to the party, everybody. I am your host, Lech, aka The Indian Jesus, here to resurrect the second coming of common sense. Hit that like and subscribe. I would do it for you, and let's party. So I know. We've been talking so much about Dylan Mulvaney. You're probably sick of it, but stick with me, because we're going to check out a conversation that I think sheds light on why this whole thing blew up the way that it did. The question of why people like me continue to talk about Dylan Mulvaney and the trans stuff in general is a good one, especially if you're not in the weeds, especially if you don't really dig into what, at least I believe, is going on. It could be very easy to think that it's all harmless. And so we have a conversation here from the Culture War podcast. It's Tim's podcast, but he's not really consequential for this. It's the two women that are his guests, and they're talking about Dylan in a way that I haven't heard before. A conservative and a liberal woman, both giving their thoughts, and I think it's a really interesting exchange.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the issue actually is because Dylan is either, whatever your view is, either as a trans person or as a BORAT style character, as I've described it.
I agree with that. I agree that Dylan is a BORAT-style character.
I think the issue is more so that Dylan is particularly nails on a chalkboard to the average person. Mm-hmm. So a lot of beer companies have had drag queens and other pride ads that nobody batted an eye over.
Nope.
I think the issue is that Dylan Mulvaney as an individual is particularly grating and offensive.
And that's not because Dylan is this gender or this sexuality or that sexuality. It's because Dylan's audience is made up of children. And so if you take somebody whose audience is children and you try to sell them beer, we are going to have an issue. A drag queen, an adult drag queen, may not be my flavor, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's the big difference.
Yeah, well, I know that conservatives really don't like Dylan Mulvaney. And look, I can understand some of the issues that people have with Dylan Mulvaney in particular.
Do you know? This is what I mean. This is the liberal woman who's like, well, yeah, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? Whereas if you've been talking about this, you understand exactly what the big deal is. And it's frustrating that somebody who is liberal and would be supporting Dylan, would be supporting Pride and all of that stuff, has no idea why people are upset at Dylan. And if maybe they're not upset at Dylan specifically, but how Dylan is being used.
However, first of all, like if you talk to a lot of people, especially liberals, they don't even know who that is.
That's not surprising at all.
The only reason I even know who Dylan Mulvaney is because there's this hugely disproportionate level of like attention being paid by conservative sort of pundits.
And you never stop to think, why is that? Let me look into this. Is there something more that I'm not understanding? If you're surprised that a liberal woman like her doesn't understand, you will definitely find a home at the Indian Jesus Discord server where the party never ends. That's right, 24/7 we are in there hanging out. And after every single live stream, we go in for an after panel where you're not stuck behind your keyboard, but you are on screen with me and everybody else. You can cam up if you want to. You don't have to. Either way, it is a grand old time. Come and join us.
To Dylan Mulvaney. And a lot of it is sensationalism.
Dylan, I mean, as a woman, you don't think that he's particularly offensive?
Yeah.
I mean, this is an individual who he really used that just as because he was getting attention and clout from this.
Well, a lot of people
first day
do
being a
things
woman,
for
second day being a woman, and he reduces
a girl. First day of girlhood, not womanhood, girlhood.
Being a woman to this ridiculous caricature.
Yeah, wearing high heels in the forest.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dylan in general is perhaps a little bit ridiculous. I don't feel offended personally. I do think Dylan is. I did find the girlhood part offensive. I did find the tampon part offensive.
That's what we're talking about, honey. What do you think we're talking about? I know we're talking about things about Dylan that Dylan did that offended you, and I'm not really offended by Dylan, except the exact things that you just said.
What?
But that's his whole shtick.
But I actually find the tampon part much more offensive, not from Dylan's point of view, but from the Tampax point of view. That Tampax would endorse someone like that because, well, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly. That is what we have been saying. And that's why we keep having to talk about this stuff. Because this is, I have no idea who this woman is, but she's on Tim Pool's show. So she's somebody. And if she's not aware of even why people don't like Dylan, when she shares the same opinion, she's offended by the same things, but is willing to come on the show and say, well, I'm not really that offended. This is why we have to keep hammering it home.
But I don't think it's necessarily like Dylan's fault in this case to accept this. I think it's the corporations that I would blame in this situation.
Agreed.
My response when you said a disproportionate amount of like right-wing pundits focus on Dylan Mulvaney. Dylan Mulvaney has like 13 million followers, and is getting big brand sponsorships from Nike. So if liberals, I think what you describe actually is fairly apt. Liberals don't pay attention.
Bingo.
So you've got conservatives who are like, hey, something's not right here. And I can't speak to, obviously, if you look at Matt Walsh, for instance, his view is particularly conservative and right wing, that, his view is Dylan represents trans people and this is bad and this is wrong. That is not my view. My view is that Dylan is creating a Borat-like character that insults women and trans people, is extremely grating to the average person, exemplified by the Bud Light effect, and is doing no favors to trans people or women, and is actually creating fuel for conservatives to, levy their ideological differences with transgender.
Well,
ideology.
I think he.
Bingo.
That's it. That's the whole thing. So if you can't understand that is why people are talking about this, then you need to pay attention. You need to talk to the people who are upset. Instead of just assuming that we're all bigots, understand what we think. But we know that's a lot to ask, and liberals don't pay attention to anything. It's so frustrating, but this is why we keep having to talk about the same things over and over and over and over and over again, because they don't get it. But somehow they have all the institutional power to run the establishment. I don't know how it works. All I know is that we have to continue stepping up for what we believe in and pushing back against what we think is wrong. So if you're with me, then let's do this. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me once again. I am your host, Lutch, aka the Indian Jesus, here to resurrect the second coming of common sense. Until next time, guys, I am out of here. Peace.